Hello everybody, I'm Brian Freeman, it's The View from the Top, and we've got a special edition because probably like me, you woke up to the news this morning that SIRVA and BGRS have announced a combination. I'm not going to go stronger than that. I'm not going to say the word acquisition because we're going to get into that, but something big has happened in our industry today, and I'm hoping that you guys can help me as we try and go through and deep dive into what it is that has happened. So let's see, people are pouring in from all day. I can see Susan Ginsberg from New York, Sandra Clary is with us, Sumaya has come out, Vinny from out in rainy Portland. It's sunny here in London, Vinny, you must come over one day. We've got Stephanie coming in from Chicago, but of course Chicago is where all this is based. So maybe Andreas from Winchester, we got Damien, we got so many. And I'll just keep talking for a moment. Who else we got? We got Pat Jurgens, of course, one of my co-hosts on The View from the Top every week doing our tax updates. We've got Jennifer coming in. I'm not sure where Jennifer is based. We've got Cliff. We've got people coming in from all over the world. And I'll just give it a few moments to let people come in so we start deep diving into everything that we're going to be talking about today. So we've got Steve Hoffman. What's the deal? Oh, good pun there, Steve. Not. With the SIRVA BGRS merger, Steve Hoffman from Deal. We've got Steve. Where's Steve from Southern California? What do we got here? Tom. This is a wow, to say the least. Interesting comment, Tom. I mean, it is a wow, but I put this out there on LinkedIn, and a few people actually said, oh, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. So, I mean, tell me, you out there in the audience, were you surprised or were you predicting this? Let me know what your views were. Who else have we got here? We've got Melanie from Orlando Airport, headed home from an amazing SRRC. And also shout out, I know that a lot of people are out at FEM2 at the moment. So anyway, let's start by just getting into the subject. I see we've already got well over 100 people live, but you know how it works because I'm sure many of you have been on The View from the Top before. Join in the conversation, write in the comments box, tell us what your views are, your thinking on this. I mean, this is a mega merger, whichever way you look at it. I mean, we've got what is probably number 2 and number 3 in the industry coming together to form a huge number 1. So we really do have the, whatever you want to call it, the 800-pound gorilla in the marketplace coming in. So a very, very exciting time. I want to start off with just with a caveat, with a warning that everything I'm going to be talking about today is based on either publicly available information or it's just based on my own views and thoughts about what has happened. I have not spoken to anybody at BGRS or anybody at SIRVA to gain their insights. I did reach out to them. I've not heard yet. Hopefully we'll get more of that in due course. But this is just based on what we can all see and what we can all know what's going on. So comments here from Vinny. There will be other RMC mergers happening. Yeah, I tend to agree with that, Vinny, and we'll come on to that. I think there will be. And from Drew, surprise for sure. No SIRVA but Carter's, but SIRVA plus BGRS. Wow. Okay, let's get into this, and let me just start off by maybe giving you a view as to what I know so far. And please shout out if there's anybody in the audience from SIRVA or BGRS, then I'll be particularly interested in any insights that you can give. But let me just tell you the things that that I know. First of all, back in 2019, and this was June 2019, Relo Group, which is a Japanese company, bought BGRS. So they bought BGRS. What are we talking about? June 2019. So that was 9 months before the proverbial hit the fan and the world just stopped because of coronavirus. So they made that acquisition then. And then in November 2019, SIRVA tried to acquire or agreed to acquire Cartus for an estimated 400 million. So that happened then. Of course, that deal, the Server-Cartus deal, never happened. And nobody quite knows the reason, but I'm guessing it had a lot to do with the fact that the world changed in late February, early March 2020, which was before closure. There was litigation, and anyway, the deal didn't happen. So what do we know? We know that Server was acquisitive because they were trying to buy Cartus. We also know that Relo Group had an intention to become a major global relocation player, and they did that. They bought BGRS, and indeed they bought Air Inc. So let's not forget that. And I know we've got people from Air Inc. on the call who are also involved in this, in the sense that Relo Group also owns Air Inc. So that's what's the situation then. And in terms of size, just to give you a feeling, my understanding is that Server has about 2,700 employees and BGRS has about 1,300. So roughly speaking, Server is twice the size of BGRS. Okay, so that's what we had. So what do we know now? Well, the first thing is that, actually, let's just see what some of the comments are. Here, we've got, just read out some of these comments that are coming in. The bigger they get, this is from Steve Hitchcock, the more difficult it is for them to properly service the middle market. Very interesting point. I think we'll come on to that. In fact, I'll come on to that now. I mean, there is a view out there that says you have to be either big or niche, and the players who are in the middle will struggle, and that there is a race to either get very, very niche or very, very big. There's a phrase that I've heard in acquisition strategy that says, go large, go niche, or go bust. And I do wonder whether this is a play for the large players to going very, very large. Henri makes the point, does this mean there is another pandemic coming? Oh my God, I hope not, Henri. I cannot cope with that. Although my wife, who actually worked as a vaccinator, tells me she'd quite like one because she really enjoyed her job, which she doesn't have anymore. But that's as an aside. Other comments here. Ben Jones, I didn't think the Cartus fiasco was going to be the end of the Server adventure. Well, I wouldn't necessarily use the word fiasco, but clearly it's not the end of the adventure, and Server are definitely going ahead. By the way, this deal is meant to close within 90 days. So, here we are now, beginning of May. So we're talking about July time, aren't we, for this to happen. Yeah, and there's a comment here from Sylvia. Madison Dearborn, they're the people who own Server, was looking for a large RMC to acquire for quite a while. Well, interestingly, of course, before Madison Dearborn owns Server, CDR, Clayton, Dubilier and Rice own them, and they're the people who've now funded Vialto. So one of the things we are seeing, of course, is private equity very much coming into our industry. Anyway, let's just put that to one side for the moment. What do we know about the deal? I've talked a bit about the background to the deal. So what we've got is Relo Group being acquisitive, having acquired BGRS and Air Inc., and Server being, or trying to be, acquisitive with the purchase or the non-purchase of Cartus. But what do we know actually about this deal? And this is where, to my mind, it gets very, very interesting. Because when I first woke up and I read this, and I saw it said that Server, the new company, is going to be called, at least initially, which is an interesting phrase, at least initially, it's going to be called Server-BGRS. So, that sort of initially implies that they might change the name to something else. They might just call it Server, they might just call it BGRS. But normally with these things, the name that comes first is the dominant player. So to my mind, when I read that, I thought, okay, Server is the dominant player. It's going to be called Server-BGRS. The other thing that made me think Server will be the dominant player, of course, is that Server is much larger. Server has got twice as many employees as BGRS, and indeed it's got much more revenues, although we're talking different sorts of revenues, because clearly Server has a household goods arm, whereas BGRS is much more a vendor manager. So those two things made me think SIRVA was going to be the dominant player. The other thing that we know so far, and again, this is in the public information, is that the CEO of SIRVA, Tom Obersdorf, will remain the CEO of the combined entity, and that Tracy Morris, who's the CEO of BGRS, will be retiring once the transaction is completed and implemented. So those three things together seem to make it quite clear that SIRVA is the dominant player. But, and this is a big but, nothing in life is quite that simple. First of all, we know that private equity like to exit. And, you know, Madison Dearborn, yes, they've been growing this, but at some point they're going to want to exit. So, you know, that makes me just slightly nervous to say SIRVA is necessarily the dominant player. But the other thing that is interesting is when you look at the deal, the way the deal is happening is SIRVA and BGRS are being put together into a new company. And that new company is going to be owned by the owners of SIRVA and the owners of BGRS. In other words, by Relo Group funds and Madison Dearborn funds are both going to be owning SIRVA BGRS. And initially, the Madison Dearborn side is going to own 100% of the common stock. But, and this is an important but, Relo Group is going to be owning 23%. It's going to be owning the preferred shares. It's going to have a new class of preferred shares, and it has a right, as I read the document, and it has a right to convert those preferred shares to common shares so that they get 23% of the company. So Relo Group is not out of this. They own preferred shares. They don't have voting shares. They own preferred shares, but they also have the right to have 23%. In addition, again, this is from the document that is on Relo Group's website, they also have a call option to acquire the shares up to 100%, up to the 1st of April 2025. So there is a possibility here that Relo Group will actually be able to acquire 100% of SIRVA BGRS by April 25. And given that private equity likes to exit, maybe that's part of it. And I don't know, I'm just guessing from what I've seen on the website. And I'd love if there's anybody out there who knows anything about this who can share. But there does seem to be some thought in this structure. Don't think of it as an acquisition. This does seem to be a genuine combination, a merger. And interestingly, the document doesn't talk about acquisition, and there's no suggestion anywhere in the document of money passing hand. You know, this does seem to be an equity for equity transaction, and it does seem to be the case that although SIRVA will be in control initially, Tom will be the CEO, they've got the more employees, Tracy is retiring, all that we know, but the BGRS side, Relo Group, will have the option to acquire 100%, and indeed will have 23% of the common stock once they decide to convert their preferred shares, and I don't know what the terms of the preference is, into it. So it's a very, very interesting combination. So that's what I think we know. Now, I mean, let me just ask you a question. I'm going to get into it in a bit more. Here's the question. I actually did a poll on this in LinkedIn. Okay. What was your first reaction when you heard about the news? And I'll give you three options. Okay, here we go. Do you think this is great news for the industry? And it's great news because we've got two big players coming together, and they're going to be a really dominant player. They're going to be really process efficient. They're going to be really effective. They're going to invest in a lot of technology. They're going to really be good for the industry. Or do you think it's no big deals? It's just two big players getting together, and two big players coming together don't necessarily make a superstar player. They just make a bigger player. It's not a huge deal. Or conversely, do you think it's very worrying? Do you think that this is a sign that our industry is consolidating too much? Do you think this is a sign that we've got a problem with global mobility globally? I mean, I'm just interested in your views. Let me just see other comments here. Steve Hoffman, what is the approximate combined valuation of this new mega RMC? Steve, no idea. And there's nothing disclosed. So I'd love to give you a number, but I think your guess is as good as mine. So we've got Chris here. Rick Willard, time will tell. I don't agree with lots to offer that they do not have. And I think Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Chris is with BGRS, but Chris, maybe just give a bit more information there if you could. So other comments, is this going to create a flurry of RFPs? Yeah, I mean, let's come on to that, Silver, but I think, you normally get quite a lot of competitive activity in these situations, don't you? For one reason or another. But we'll get on to that in a moment. Comment here from Rick. Chris Furler, I hope you're right. There are a lot of folk at BGRS who I'm quite fond of and are great mobility professionals. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'll get on to is what's going to be the impact on the people. That is a really, really big concern. I'm going to get onto it in a moment. I'm going to talk about the impact on the industry, the impact on the suppliers, on the customers, on the suppliers, the impact on everybody. In answer to that poll that I said, what was your first reaction? This is what came up on LinkedIn. 42% said it was great news, and about the same number, 42% said it was no big deal, and then about 16% said it's very worrying. So if you're one of those groups, again, do share with me what you think. Do you think it is great news? Do you think it's no big deal, or do you think and do you think it's very worrying? And I think Drew has asked me what these three options are. Again, it's there, it's on the screen, Drew. What was your first reaction? It's great news, it's no big deal, or it's very worrying. So those are some of the questions that we've got. Henri, his first reaction was, of course. I saw a lot of people saying that they thought, yeah, this was going to happen. But who knows? Anyway, let's just dive into this a bit. And one of the things that I want to do is actually get into this question about why did this deal happen? Because I think there are some, from my point of view, there's lots of good news in this, but there's also some worrying things out there. And I don't want to be the sort of the naysayer at the moment, but I just want to talk about some of the major drivers that have come out here. When I looked at the document from Relo Group, and Relo Group is the owner of BGRS, it starts off by saying, based on its vision of becoming a top global relocation company, Relo Group resolved at a meeting of the board of directors to enter an agreement to combine with BGRS and SIRVA. In other words, it's quite interesting at that point that, again, this goes to my point, this is not about Relo Group exiting the market, quite the opposite. I mean, they're saying that it's based on their vision of creating a global relocation group. That's why they're doing it. And so it genuinely is a merger. But what they say, and this is quite interesting, they say, as part of the process, this was their previous strategy. In June 2019, I've talked about this, Relo Group acquired BGRS. Then they go on to say, however, the world was soon reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic. Then they say in the next paragraph, and this is on their website, this is their press release, the global economy became stagnant and restrictions on people's movement still continue. Considering the expected shrinkage of the domestic market, and by that they mean the domestic Japanese market, which is an issue specific to Japan in post-COVID-19 world and Japanese companies' acceleration of global expansion, the company has been focusing on the restructuring and digitization of the BGRS group and building the foundations for its business. In other words, part of this has been driven from a BGRS point of view from the pandemic. So we've got consolidation happening because, frankly, the world fell off a cliff. And obviously, that has been a big struggle for any Relo company. Now, my fear in all this is, and I know I talked about it a couple of years ago, and many of you may disagree with me, my fear is that in some ways we've passed peak global mobility. I remember writing an article about 3-4 years ago saying, are we at peak global mobility? I'm now worried we're past peak global mobility, because I think a couple of things have happened with the pandemic. With the pandemic, everyone has realized they've got a major problem with their supply chains. You know, everybody knows it's difficult to get stuff at the moment, and we're all feeling that in our economic lives. And that actually makes you wonder whether companies are going to start trying to shorten their supply chains, build more stuff closer to home, and rely less on overseas operations. The other major trend that has happened, and this obviously has just been the last 8 weeks or so, has been a new Iron Curtain is coming down over Europe. And we're seeing, you know, Russia very much a pariah state at the moment. And, you know, it's worrying and open at the moment about actually, is all that globalization we saw in the period from, say, I don't know, when the Berlin Wall came down till about 8 weeks ago, is that a period of globalization which is now beginning to end? And does this mean we're going to see less globalization? A, because, as I said, a new Iron Curtain might be coming down, and B, because the pandemic means that people are realizing the importance of shortening their supply chain. And then, of course, if we get nationalist governments who are putting up more immigration barriers, which we're seeing in the UK, and we may well see if there's another Trump run at the presidency in a couple of years' time, whether we're going to see, again, more problems with globalization coming through. So I think there are some economic drivers. The other thing, of course, is that at the same time, the pandemic didn't just affect the RMCs, the pandemic affected all the RMCs' clients who are busy looking to cut cost. And they're all struggling out there. And we've got a cost of living crisis around the world, which is putting pressure. So we've got a time when it's hard, you know, people want to raise their prices because costs have gone up. Purchasers want to cut their prices. And at the same time, there's more pressure to develop digital services, and that costs money to develop. And so that is really squeezing the profitability of RMCs. So it's a very, very difficult time. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why we're seeing mergers, and why I agree with, I think it was Vinny and some of the others who are saying that there are going to be more mergers coming out. So I think we've got that coming out. So anyway, I want to move on to a different thing. I mean, I asked the question, are we past peak globalization? I know that's a very contentious one, and I'll leave that out there. But now let's look at what is the impact going to be. Actually, let me just take a couple of comments in there. Let's just take here from Martin Mayotte. I question if this will actually get to the finish line, or if some will back out at the 11th hour. My guessing is this will get there. You know, I think it was a very unusual situation with the SIRVA-Carter's merger, because that happened and then COVID happened. And obviously that just changed the world. So unless the world does change, which of course with Ukraine, and heaven forbid what could happen if that expands and rolls into other territories. But that aside, you know, I think this one will compete, and they've got 90 days to do that. From Steve Hoffman, global mobility needs to combine with the global remote working function. Absolutely agree. And I think that's one of the things, that's one of the ways our industry is set to change. I think if we're looking at ourselves in, say, 5 or 10 years' time, we won't be the global mobility function. We will be the workforce deployment function. So I think we've got a whole new role that we're going to be out there. Comment from Stephanie. I think both RMCs have weaknesses that the other strengths can remedy. Sorry, I think both RMCs have weaknesses that the other strengths can remedy. If the process is completed strategically and with great thought, I think it would be an amazing thing. Most importantly, the service levels need to remain as a priority. If that focus is lost, it could be a disaster. If this comes to fruition, it'll be interesting to watch it unfold. I think that's a great point, Stephanie. But actually, I'm going to raise another point, which is that, you know, what we need to understand, I think, is that SIRVA and BGRS are actually very, very different animals. You know, BGRS is exclusively, or almost exclusively, a vendor manager. It has a supply chain. It doesn't have things in-house. Conversely, SIRVA has got lots of things in-house in terms of DSP and moving companies. So what is the new company going to do? Is the new company, SIRVA BGRS, going to be a pure play vendor a la BGRS, or is it going to be using its in-house assets wherever possible a la SIRVA? I mean, those are two fundamentally different business models. Now, I know that they must have discussed this. They must have discussed this internally, and greater minds than mine will have thought about this. But it does make me wonder what it would be. Now, that brings me on to the first question, I suppose, I've got. What is the impact going to be on customers? You know, if you're a customer of SIRVA or you're a customer of BGRS, what does this mean to you? Now, I know the very first thing that will have happened today is that all the senior people at SIRVA and BGRS will be on the phone to their clients, explaining what's going on, reassuring them and telling them that this is all going to be absolutely wonderful. At least I certainly hope they're doing that. They certainly should be doing that. If I was running it, that is exactly what they should be doing. But nonetheless, there are questions to be asked if you are a customer. I don't know if there's anybody out there who is a customer of BGRS or SIRVA, but you know, you have one model or the other. I'm guessing initially they will keep the two relatively separate, and they'll say you can stick with whichever, you know, your grandfather, if you like. You can keep with whichever legacy model you have. But at some point, they're going to want to put that together, because the whole point of this merger is to create operational efficiencies. And I've got it there. Don't take that from me. I've got it here. Just bear with me, and I'll just read it to you. It says, just bear with me. It says, here we go. Based on the situation above and the future prospects of both parties, the BGRS group and the SIRVA group agreed on their proposed integration and will together pursue profit through the expansion of the scale of the business and the pursuit of operational and cost efficiencies. Then it goes on, to fulfill the potential of both parties, the BGRS group and the SIRVA group agree integration expansion of the scale of the business and streamlining redundant systems will allow for greater focus in pursuit of a stronger mobility and relocation provider. Okay, so what they're saying, and they're saying it quite clearly, is that there will be operational efficiencies and redundant processes. Now that means, for example, they've got two different technology platforms. SIRVA and BGRS are not on the same technology platform. Presumably, they are going to have to combine those. And they either go for one platform, or they go for the other platform, or indeed they go for a third platform. But that's going to be an issue. And if you're a client of one or the other, then you may be moved from one platform to another. What they're not going to do, I'm sure, is maintain both platforms forever and spend all the money in investing it. Because again, they've been quite clear that the aim of this is to create efficiencies. So let me just hear what what Vinny has said. He is a customer of BGRS at UPS, and he said this: as a customer of BGRS, I'm excited about this potential merger. As my buddy Chris mentioned, this could be a great benefit to cover some of the gaps that exist in both RMCs for the client. And I agree, Vinny. I mean, there are huge opportunities. I mean, there clearly, with any merger, there is going to be issues at the beginning as they marry the two things together. But with all these things, you've got to look past the short term to the medium term. And you know, the short term is how do they get these two systems together? And that's one of the impact on customers. That was a negative impact on customers, of course, that they've got to impact the two technology platforms. They've got to work out how they're working together. The positive, of course, is they'll have much greater numbers of staff. They'll have more in different destinations. They'll have great people. You know, there's great people on the server side. There's great people on the BGRS side. They'll be able to work together. They'll have much greater thought leadership with two corporate minds coming together. So there's a lot of really positive impact for customers. But as I said, there's also this issue of the two different operational models and how they're going to deal with that. You know, are they going to go to a SIRVA style model, or are they going to go to a BGRS model? Again, if anybody's got any views on that, I know that philosophically, some people very much like going one way, some people go the other. But if you've got any thoughts on how those operational models might come together. I've also mentioned the technology platforms, and to me, this maybe it's because I'm with a technology company, but this is a big issue. I've got a strong view that companies that are in the RMC space shouldn't try and be technology companies. Technology companies should be technology companies. I know from the Benevo perspective, we work very well with a number of RMCs, including some of these that we're talking about today, to work hand in glove. But to me, there is a complete difference between a digital provider and a, if you like, a more traditional white glove provider. So we've talked about the impact on customers. Let me just talk about the impact on suppliers. Now, I don't know, I'm guessing there's quite a lot of suppliers out in the audience, and if any of you are a supplier, you're part of the supply chain to either BGRS or SIRVA, please do let me have your thoughts. Do you know about this in advance? Have they told you this was happening? What is this going to do to your own strategy? What is your thinking about this? Because let's try and work this one through. We've got two big companies. As I said, one's got 2,700 employees, the other's got 1,300 employees, coming together to form this mega company. Okay, and they've all got their own supply chains. You know, SIRVA has got its supply chain, some of which is in-house, some of which is third party, and BGRS has got its third party. Okay, are they going to continue with every supplier they have at the moment? I mean, my guess is no. I mean, I just can't see it. There's got to be some rationalization, because one of the things that they said in the statement is they're looking to get operational efficiencies and to get rid of process redundancies. Well, that, to my mind, is a bit of a code word for the fact that they're going to be putting pressure on the suppliers. They're going to be looking for the best deal from the suppliers, and they're going to be looking to consolidate their supply chain. So the question then is, how is that going to happen? Now, where it's particularly worrying, I suppose, is if you are a BGRS supplier and you're competing when it comes to SIRVA with a supplier that's actually part of the SIRVA group. Because why would they go out-house if they've got somebody in-house? So I think we are going to see a real consolidation of suppliers. Let's just see a couple of other comments that have come up from Chris. My opinion only, and not the formal opinion of BGRS, is SIRVA was hoping to leverage Carter's technology. When that deal died, they had to figure out a new plan. While we had accelerated our technology infrastructure, I think our platform must be impressive for them. Yeah, I think that may well be right, Chris, because you've got your own technology, and SIRVA, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they operate on the ServiceNow platform. Maybe someone can just correct me on that. So, I mean, I think, you know, they are going to hopefully leverage some of the BGRS technology, and that could be very attractive for them. Other comments here from Marie out in Estonia. Not a supplier anymore, but many suppliers, me in the past included, were suppliers to both at the same time. In that context, it wouldn't scare me much. Some are going to lose business for sure, though. Yeah, and I think it depends on the type of supplier you are. You know, if you are a supplier that can supply both, for example, if you're a DSP in a location where SIRVA don't have anybody on the ground, I think that's right. But on the other hand, if you, you know, if you're a supplier, and maybe particularly in the household goods industry, where SIRVA are very, very strong, I think that might be a bit more common. Another comment coming up here from Henri out in France. Chris Furlot, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts from the inside. I like your honesty. Absolutely, Chris. And I think you maybe are one of the sole representatives we got from BGRS. So anything else you can add into the mix, would love to hear it. Also interested to know when you found out, was this news to you this morning, or had you guys all been told in advance? Don't tell me anything you don't want to go out publicly, because obviously we are streaming live. Other comments here from Rick. Chris Furlot, no doubt, operational efficiencies will be realized, and that should be good for the new company and for the industry as a whole. Yeah, I mean, I think operational efficiencies always are good, unless, of course, you are the person being operationally made efficient. In other words, you're losing your work because it's going somewhere else. And that's one of the, if you like, the short-term problems. You know, the medium-term problems is it creates much more efficiency. Comment here from Steve Hitchcock. Obviously, SIRVA will want to manage all moving services to capture profits by eliminating the middleman. Yeah, I mean, that's my fear. And that's where I think, you know, that's one of my what are my thoughts here? Oh, big shout out. There we've got Vinny Valverde, who is our Global Mobility Professional of the Year, saying with Chris Furlock. Chris is an amazing guy. There, Chris, you got it from the man himself, from the great Vinny. And from Mary, spot on, Steve. Plus, they have other legacy long-term relationships, especially in moving, that will probably stay as legacy. Okay, so let's move on a bit. So we've talked about it now from the customer point of view. We've looked at it from the supplier point of view. Let's look at it from the competitor's point of view. What does this mean for the competitors of what is now SIRVA BGRS? What does it mean? And to my mind, there's a difference here between short-term and long-term. Short-term, there is going to be a lot of uncertainty and worry. SIRVA and BGRS, as I said, will be putting their arms around their clients to try and make sure that they are loved and they know exactly what's going on, and that's going to be 100% what they're going to do. But the competitors are going to be knocking on the door. You know, if I'm a competitor to SIRVA or BGRS, you know, I won't mention names, but you all know who they are. And there's many of you out there. Any of those RMCs, if I'm out there as a competitor RMC to SIRVA BGRS, I think the first thing I'm going to be doing is phoning them up and saying, what do you think about this? You know, what platform are you on? I'm going to be finding some way to maybe throw a little bit of oil on the fire or something to say, I don't know what the right phrase is, but to say, you know, are we sure about the technology that they've got, or what do you think is going to happen? You won't have the independence of suppliers, or staff may be unsettled. I don't know. I'm going to try and mix it up. I'm sure. And I'm sure there's business development people in all the other companies who are right now going through their list to see who have they got good relationships with, who is a SIRVA client or a BGRS client that they can try and get to. And of course, you know, the big one is what we've got here from Elisa. The pressure on even more competitive price will be fierce. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me just come back to that in a moment. But I think what we're going to see is, you know, is this concern, especially about companies. Maybe there's companies out there who are going to RFP at the moment. Okay, and of course, if there's somebody that's going out to RFP, then you know, you might be trying to say, well, is it SIRVA? Is it BGRS? Maybe both of them will be distracted. Maybe somebody will be able to get in the middle there. So I think we're going to see some stuff from that. I mean, the other thing I think we're going to see, and Elisa made that point, let's just pull that up again, is, you know, is we're going to see a focus on price. Because if new SIRVA BGRS can be more competitive in price, then, and they will be, I'm sure they'll try to be. And the first thing they're going to do is try and push down the cost of their suppliers. They're going to try and get their margins up. They're going to try and push down the cost of their technology, the cost of their suppliers. And also they're going to try economies of scale to push. So that's going to make it harder for some of the competitors. So in the short term, I think the competitors might be licking their lips and saying we can go in and we can do something different. In the longer term, I'm just going to take that comment off for the moment. I'm going to come back to it in a moment, Nicola. But I think what we're going to see is this competition coming in and trying to find a way in there. But that is a very, very short issue. Okay, let me just take a couple of comments here then. I've got this from Drew Phillips. It's a big move coming out of the pandemic with no data behind what is really to come to base focus on. Big move. Yeah, I mean, this is a huge, huge gamble by SIRVA and BGRS. Although I would state, and this is it's very different to that Carter's deal, as I read it, no money has passed hands. This is a share for share deal. No money has passed hand, although clearly there is an option for Relo to buy 100% at presumably some pre-agreed price. Other comments, Martin is agreeing. He said, Drew Phillips, very astute. And here's that comment for Nicola. I said I'll get back to it. Competitors will be able to capitalize on the VIPs and more diverse workforces. We're in the age of diversity and inclusion. This needs to be recognized and accommodated as such. Smaller competitors will have upper hand in this effort. Yeah, I mean, that may well be the case. I mean, obviously, and I know I'm going to be biased coming from a Benevo perspective, but I also think that technology platforms will have an advantage to say, well, actually, you can get two conventional legacy systems, or you can get a completely new technology system, and then use an RMC as and when for the white glove. So I mean, but I think we are going to see this impact on competitors. So longer term, I think the major competitors will face a bit of a challenge, because SIRVA BGRS is going to have so much more heft than anybody else. They're going to be so much bigger than anybody else, with so many more people, so much more money to invest, so much more resource, so much more human capital, thought leadership, that and indeed just things like marketing and exhibiting at events or whatever. Their marketing budgets are going to be so much larger. So so they're going to be really big out there. But the good news for the competitors is you've got one less competitor in the marketplace. If one of the problems that you have, and probably like many of you, I've been involved in organizing RFPs. One of the problems with RFPs, and I mean this from a corporate perspective, issuing the RFP, is who do you admit to the RFP? From a practical perspective, you might send out the RFI even to sort of, I don't know, 8 or 9 companies. But when it gets to the RFP stage, typically you probably don't want more than 4 actually getting to the oral stage, or submitting long documents, because it's just so much effort from your point of view. Well, if in the old days SIRVA and BGRS were quite likely to make the shortlist, now only one of them will make the shortlist, which means there's another space on the shortlist for you if you're a competitor. So I think there's lots of good news in there and bad news for competitors, but there's definitely a lot of good news. Let's just see other comments that are coming in here from Spencer Caldwell. In terms of business development, I can say as a client of one of the two that recently completed an RFP, I've already heard from multiple of the companies involved in our RFP this morning. Okay, so I'm not sure which company you're with, Spencer, but it sounds that they're already on the phone or the emails, as I thought they would be. What else have we got coming out here? Victoria, personal brands are so important these days. I wonder how long until local consultants start dominating local markets. And in Berlin, it's already happening. I'm seeing local consultants change up their service model and killing it on topics like home search and immigration. Not sure if it will affect big companies that need global scale, but something to keep an eye on. And yeah, I mean, I made the point at the beginning, Victoria, that there's a line in acquisition strategy that says go large, go niche, or go bust. And and obviously you're working in the market of go niche, and SIRVA and BGRS are working in the market of go large. The problem is if you're in the middle, if you're neither fish nor fowl, I think that's when it can get really, really tricky. And I'm delighted to say that Elisa is agreeing with me. So true, Brian. Let's see what other comments we've got. Loving the positive perspective. Thank you for that. For Henri, correct, Brian. Yet they also have the weakness of their strength. That's an interesting phrase. They will have the weakness of their strength. I love it. They will be very, very big indeed. And that always comes at the cost of speed and adaptability. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the big issue that SIRVA BGRS are going to be fearful of, is they lose the ability to be agile. So other comments coming in from Cliff here. Each RMC has their niche, and as long as they have technology and customer service, they will find clients who want them. Yeah, the problem there, Cliff, is that technology is getting more and more expensive. And to be niche, it's hard to have top flight technology unless you have top flight technology. Hard to be top flight unless you have top flight technology. And that's why, from a Benevo perspective, we are just laser focused on technology. That's all we do. And we don't try and do anything in, if you like, the real world. Everything we do is through partners, and everything is technology. Other comments coming in from Drew. The scrambling on a Friday that competitors and vendor partners must be doing is blowing my mind. The strategy of the meetings that are being called. Hashtag the ripple effect. Absolutely. And what a day for it to coming out first thing on a Friday morning. Well, hopefully I've done my little bit to help educate the industry by sharing the news and by getting everybody's thought processes together. Comment here from Priya. Steve Hitchcock, BGRS already had a philosophy of wanting to work on large mobility programs, and on some occasions, SIRVA then picked up the business. Will be interesting to see what philosophy is taken by the combined company. That's a great point. I didn't want to sort of talk about it, but someone else has raised it. I'm certainly aware of a number of companies where they were specifically told by BGRS that they were not appropriate to be a client of theirs because they only wanted to focus on large programs. And certainly, I know from my perspective, I've certainly picked up clients like that, and I'm sure Priya is saying the same, and others have. So again, that comes down to culture. Is the culture of SIRVA going to be, if you like, the mid-market upwards culture, or is it going to be the BGRS want to focus in on major company culture? It's going to be very, very interesting, and it may well be it's neither. It may well be that they decide something completely different strategically. Other comments here from Sylvia. Large needs to partner with niche to be able to be agile and quality. Couldn't agree more, and certainly that's why we do partner with loads and loads of RMCs. From Cliff, niche can't afford the content upgrades needed to keep up with advancing technology. Absolutely. I mean, as a technology company, we've got 50 people working full-time on development in our development labs. You know, that is not something that an RMC typically will be able to do. And Stephanie said, yeah, to Drew's point about all this happening on Friday, especially coming off a week of big travel events. Absolutely. We had the SRRC, we had the Portal and Relocation Council, we've got FEM coming off, going on today. So many comments going on. And I'm going to get on to one other area. Actually, I'll just take Rick's point, then I'll go on to the last area I want to talk about. Thank you for hosting this discussion, Brian. Hats off to all commentators. Especially appreciate Chris's comments from the inside of this announcement. Absolutely. So we've talked so far about what is the impact on customers, what is the impact on the supply chain, what is the impact on competitors. There is, of course, a fourth stakeholder group, and arguably the very most important. And what I want to do now, to sort of in our last sort of 10 minutes or so, is what's the impact of employees? Okay, so you're sitting there, you woke up this morning. Obviously a number of people were in the know. Yeah, good point, Henri. It's a good time to change career and become a developer. Absolutely. We all woke up this morning and we saw the news, and I woke up and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll run a show on it. And, that was it from my point of view. But lots of people woke up and they thought, this is my job. Geez, what does this mean to me personally, to my family, to my mortgage, and to my life, that these two mega companies are coming together? Because presumably, well, they're only going to have one CEO, and we already know that. We know Tom is going to be the CEO and Trace is going to step down. But presumably they're only going to have one CFO, one CHRO, one CTO. And then as they go down, we may find that they have less people on, say, the business development side. Maybe, they don't want exactly the same number of business development people. Maybe they don't want the same number of back-end developers that they might have. On the operational side, they are looking for operational efficiencies. They've said so specifically in the document that they are looking for operational efficiencies. So what does it mean for the employees? Well, I'm sorry to say, it means a worrying time, because they can say whatever they like to you, and they will, I'm sure, put their arms around you. But whatever happens, when two companies come together like this, it is worrying, even if nothing happens to you. And I hope nothing does happen to you. And I hope that the whole thing pulled together. But normally in these situations, there will be some consolidation. Now, typically the consolidation is in the back office. Because again, the structure, what SIRVA and BGRS have said is that their aim is to grow the business. They're not doing this merely to make operational efficiencies and process redundancies, which they have said that they're planning to do, but also, and they're very explicit about it, they're looking to grow the business and they're looking to take business off others. Well, that's good news, obviously, if you're on the market-facing side. if you can have, a bigger gorilla, a bigger brand behind you to go out there, and you can get into the market. But nonetheless, as Marie said, it is scary. Marie said it can be a scary time for many. I hope the employees are being properly communicated to. I've seen when it's not, and it can be a horrendous impact if not done right. Absolutely. And Sumaya says this: cost efficiency implies staffing reduction automatically. Yeah, I fear so. It doesn't have to, though, Sumaya. It could be putting more pressure on the supply chain by saying, actually, we're not going to pay so much to our suppliers in the supply chain. That, in turn, of course, might mean job losses further down the supply chain, not necessarily within SIRVA and BGRS. It may also mean that they can use more efficient technologies. They've got economies of scale. So I think there are ways that cost efficiencies doesn't translate one-to-one to staffing reductions. But yeah, I do tend to agree with you. It does sound like staffing reductions might be on the way. Cliff says this: there are staffing shortages everywhere. Maybe the impact will be less. Maybe that's another great point. We are seeing the Great Resignation. There's a lot of shortages of people. So maybe the people that SIRVA and BGRS find they have to let go, if heaven forbid they do, and I'm hoping they don't. But if they do, there'll be plenty of other jobs out there too. Again, Drew says, great point. So let's be really, really positive there. And Vinny says, I partially disagree with you, Brian. That sounds polite, actually, for I completely disagree with you. I partially disagree with you, Brian. The main focus of the RMC is to take care of our employees. I'm sure this will be at the forefront of discussions to only improve the employee experience. There may be some change management if there are changes to the teams, but from what I've seen, it will be well taken care of. Yeah, actually, I do tend to agree with that, Vinny. What I'm saying is I think if there are going to be, I'm always a positive kind of guy, but I think if there are going to be headcount reductions, they're more likely to be back office than front office. I think that's where it's going to be. Anything that is to do with business development, anything that is to do with employee experience, I think there will be a real focus on retention, especially retention of the A players. But I think the back office, I think that there might be issues there. So what else? I mean, I'm going to finish at the top of the hour. I always try and run these shows for an hour. Last topic. Is this the end of it? Do we think there will be more consolidation? What do we think Cartus is going to do? I mean, there's a question. No, because SIRVA is going to acquire Cartus. So Cartus was obviously looking to be sold at some point. What's Cartus going to do? Cartus has now gone from being number one to number two, and they're not going to like that, I guess. So, I'm down, sure, Cartus is going to think about it. But what about all the players further down? I don't know, Ayres, Altair, Wyker, I mean, everybody, other big RMCs, what are they going to do? Are we going to see some consolidation? I mean, we've seen so much consolidation in the last 10 years. I mean, names that have gone like Prudential and Pricoa, and help me out here, but there's loads of big names in our industry, Primacy, that have gone over the last few years. Are we going to see more consolidation? My guess is I think there will be more consolidation. Maybe not immediately, and I think people might be waiting to see how the next 12 months pan out. As somebody made the comment earlier, we've had the pandemic that derailed the first SIRVA deal with Cartus, and then we've got the situation in Ukraine, which is obviously, if that gets out of hand, that could certainly derail all types of things. And I suspect a lot of companies will be thinking, well, maybe let's just see how the next 6 months go. But my gut feeling is that there will be some other deal out there. Of course, the other one to talk about, which we haven't even touched on, is where does Vialto Partners fit into all this? Here we've got a completely new player, tax, immigration and mobility, backed by private equity, clearly very, very, got all sorts of exciting plans. Have they got plans to get into the RMC space? Who knows? Who knows? But, let's just see. I've not heard anything, but it'll be just interesting to see where we are in 5 years' time. My guess is in 5 years' time that some of the names of companies that we all know today will not be there, in the same way that we've lost Prudential and Procura and Primacy and many of these other, the MI Group, other names that we all remember from a few years ago now are not in the market. Some of the names that we all know today won't be there. So let me just take a few last comments from Cara Pesco. The cream of the crop of employees will be okay. They will rise to top as always. SIRVA BGRS will have the opportunity to have the best of the best. National is hiring. There we go. So you know where to send your resumes. And from Drew Phillips, business development will or should remain to help tell the story and smooth the ripples and concerns. Absolutely. Now is the time, if you're Carters or SIRVA, BGRS or SIRVA, to be really investing in your business development to get that story out there, because whatever happens, we know it's an uncertain time. It's a scary time over the next few weeks until this deal settles down. And remember, we've got 90 days or so for this deal to close. Other comment from Drew Phillips. Thanks again for the show, Brian. Saying the things all are thinking, giving all others a platform to have the discussion. From Marie, thank you for the show. Been used to get people's thoughts and some insights. And from Elisa, for sure there'll be some more consolidation. So that is pretty much that. I said I'd be on air for about an hour, and we're pretty much at the hour. I just wanted to remind everybody that we are back with the view from the top next Wednesday at our normal time. I know we're an hour earlier than normal. Our normal time, which is 4 p.m. UK, 11 a.m. Eastern. And it's a tremendous show. Our show next week is called Managing a Mega Program. And that is, we've got Siemens on the show. And Siemens, believe it or not, move 300,000 people. You heard me right, 300,000 people a year. Now, the vast majority are business travelers, but all those, they're looked at from an immigration point of view, a tax point of view, a social security point of view, but they also have 23,000 work assignments and about 2,000 long-term assignments. So huge subject next week. Believe it or not, Siemens have, I think, over 300 people in their mobility function itself. So a huge area. If you've liked the show today, please make me feel good. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's say thank you. I'm going to be on to stage. I can see my producer is there, so let's bring Tally. I always like to thank Tally. Tally, thank you very much. I know you may not be at home today. I think you're out and about, but thank you for all your help backstage as ever. And to everybody in the audience, I just want to say goodbye. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all next Wednesday. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.